da 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 do do da ba da boo ba 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 boo ba ba. Who's the man who will speak the truth? Boo ba 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 boo ba ba. Lone candles that burn. Who's the man who will bring light into your life? Boo ba 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 boo ba ba. Lone candles that burn. Who's the man who digs through human excrement to present you the gems? Boo ba 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 boo ba boo ba ba. Lone candles that burn. Who's the man who kinda sometimes knows what he's talking about? Boo ba 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 da boo ba ba. Lone candles that burn. Who's the man who has a scatterbrained, low IQ, and weak memory recall? Boo ba 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 da boo ba ba. Lone candles that burn. Hi, and welcome to Lone Candle Live. Today, I'm having another reply guying with Lone Candle. This one on Twitter. Let's take a look. I lose my cursor every time. Here it is. Alright. So this is kind of a long post, but this is what I was replying to. So this guy says, What if it saves just one life? Then would you support millions of third world immigrants running daycare scams, filling up emergency rooms, and voting for communists? Now he lists three things here. Running daycare scams. Yeah, there was an issue with immigrants running daycare scams. It wasn't all immigrants, and most of them, from what I could tell, were legally here and even citizens. But yeah, they were immigrants, at least at some point. Filling up emergency rooms. I mean, of course, it's a problem when you have more immigrants here, including illegal ones, and that means they often don't have access to regular health care, so sometimes they use up emergency rooms. I mean, there's referencing to a real problem there. And voting for communists. I'd like to see the breakdown on how many immigrants from third world countries vote for communists. I mean, he's probably referring to New York City, but I think a lot of non-immigrants voted for New York mayor also. And in general, I don't think immigrants vote for a lot of commies in the U.S. Some of the biggest anti-commie people in the U.S. are immigrants from socialist countries. For example, the key example is Cuba. Some of the biggest anti-socialist, anti-communist people in the whole country are people who came from Cuba because they've seen socialism and seen what happens, and they don't want anything to do with it. So I think that's a bit of exaggeration, but even at least my perception when I read this right here, you support millions of third world immigrants running daycare scams, filling up emergency rooms, and voting for communists. At least in my perception, maybe I'm a fool reading into things too much, but I almost see a description of a hellscape that happens because you have too many immigrants, and I feel like it's really a gross exaggeration. What comes to our mind when we read this list, which, is somewhat referring to real problems, although it seems to imply an exaggeration since, I mean, how many more daycare scams are going to have once we're cracking down on it? It's not like you're going to have this happening constantly, at least not at this level. It feels like a gross exaggeration of a hellscape that doesn't exist and is not going to exist. So it doesn't feel like calmly referring to serious problems. It feels like just listing some things out there and giving the impression of a hellscape. That, frankly, is an exaggeration. All right, he says, I don't care about the ICE shooting. It doesn't change anything. It's political noise. The footage was unclear. Wrestling with the gun is probably not a good idea. Either way, nobody supported deporting millions of people because they thought no one would get shot, which is a statistical impossibility. Imagine going up to someone before the election and saying, would you support deportations if you knew someone could die? So I'm mainly responding here really to just that he doesn't care about the ICE shooting. Like, that's something that's not important and not something we should really focus on, or that it's just political noise. And so, first of all, there's 2 ICE shootings. Both of them, I've looked at them from many angles and tried to think about them seriously and calmly, seem very clearly to be unjustified and really need to be appropriately investigated and maybe prosecuted. But what ultimately makes them, and so yeah, that's a big deal, especially when it's happened twice. And then what makes it another level of worse, which is kind of weird, because now I'm talking about a level after someone was already shot in an unjustified way, is how the Trump administration responded. Because in both cases, multiple officials at high levels, including Trump, lied about what happened. Just straight up lied about what happened in the incidences of those shootings. So any even more legitimate and calm law enforcement, you're going to have, shit's going to go down. And sometimes law enforcement is going to be perceived to have made a mistake. And sometimes they will make some mistakes. And it's going to pretend on case by case whether that mistake means, well, no, you need to go to jail, or whether, well, it was probably a mistake, but it all happened so fast, and it was reasonable for you to believe you were defending yourself. And, we don't want to screw over law enforcement in a tough situation when they had at least good reason to believe they were defending themselves. Now, I don't think either of them did in these 2 Minnesota cases. But either way, we want an administration to respond by saying, look, law enforcement is tough. We're going to do a careful investigation and figure out exactly what happened, and then to take appropriate action. What you don't want is administration to straight up lie about what happened. That moves from a level of, are we training these guys properly? Are we using proper due process? Do we have the proper culture of this law enforcement? All of which are very important things. But that moves you to a level of, no, those are acts of tyranny. Because if you're not going to look into what happens, which is the government's job to look into whether it was murder or not, whether there were appropriate shootings, if you're going to straight up lie to the people when a citizen is killed, those are acts of tyranny. That's a big freaking deal, especially if it keeps happening. And so saying you don't care about it, I don't understand that. So here's what I actually said. Agents of the state kill 2 citizens in unjustified shootings, and then the state blatantly lies about it. Those are aspects of tyranny. We can deport people without acting like this. And then I said the dark communist hellscape you present is a silly exaggeration. And that was referring to what he presented at the top. And so I should probably give an aside of my views of immigration here, or at least of illegal immigration. I have a bit of a tension in my views. On one hand, I'm not fundamentally against enforcing immigration law. And, well, what you do when you enforce immigration laws, you deport people. So I'm not fundamentally against that. However, my ideal policy would be comprehensive immigration reform. That would involve being really tough on the border, having the resources needed to make it very difficult to get across the border, as well as efforts to deport anyone who's committing crimes, and also anyone, even if they haven't committed additional, non-immigration crimes, deporting anyone who's been here 5 years or less, or something like that, an actual year limit where we're going to target anyone who does crimes inside the country, and anyone's been here 5 years or less. And if you're real serious about it, you got to crack down on employers, like seriously fine or even jail employers who are creating an incentive for illegal immigrants to come. That said, if you've been here 5 years, 10 years, a significant amount of time, you haven't been committed crimes, you've been working hard, you've been building a life, frankly, doing crappy jobs, probably for an American employer, or at least with American customers, and probably not getting paid that well, but you're working hard and you're doing a job and building a life here, well, then a deportation is a huge penalty. That's a humongous penalty. And remember, we're ripping all that hard work that you've done to build a life in this country, we're ripping that away from you and sending you back to the country you came from. That's a huge freaking penalty. And for doing what again? Crossing a line you weren't supposed to? It's an important line. But in the end, what they did was they crossed a line they weren't supposed to, not to commit crimes or to bring drugs, but to work hard. Well, that punishment doesn't meet the crime. And if a punishment doesn't meet the crime, that's injustice. And so I would create a path for citizenship for those who want to stay here and have already been here that long, but still with the penalty. It wouldn't be amnesty. Amnesty is forgiveness. Amnesty is you say, nah, we forgive you, no penalty. No, I'd still have a penalty. It would either be a fine or community service. Ideally, you give the option, so if they have somehow gotten that much money, they can do the fine or else community service. Kind of make them slaves for the local government for a little bit. But just slaves, because it's a punishment for breaking the law. And I mean, they're not going to be whipped to death or anything. But anyways, probably shouldn't have had that aside. But you are kind of making them slaves temporarily. But it's a punishment. You do some work for the local community, do some good, and then after you do enough hours of that, all right, you've paid the penalty. So, anywho, there's a tension there, since I'm not fundamentally against deporting people for being here illegally, but ideally, I would only deport people who commit crimes or who have been here less than 5 years. But if you've been working for that long, nah. I mean, that's a punishment that's way too harsh. You should have a different punishment and get on a path to citizenship. If you're going to be here, you should join the club after paying that penalty. And you wouldn't necessarily have to take someone else's spot, because you could write into the law these are additional spots. But anyways, I'm not fundamentally against deportation. And we could have done this. We could have done mass deportations in such a way where you really make sure your people are trained, where you have leaders at the top, including the president, not throwing out incendiary rhetoric, throwing out calm, deliberate rhetoric about what we're doing and how we're doing it. If you follow due process, make sure when not just dealing with civilians, but with the potential illegal immigrants, make sure we're doing the due process to make sure we got the right people and we're sending them to the right places. Following court orders. ICE is ignoring, I think, over 100 court orders. This is ridiculous. This is not normal. This shows how weakened our democracy is. ICE is ignoring a lot of court orders. So if you follow due process, properly train your people, use appropriate rhetoric, try to work with the locals when you can. If they refuse, well, you don't try to make a big show of it. You don't punish your political opponents. But yeah, federal government does have the right to enforce federal law, including immigration law, in states that don't like it. If you do these things, well, you're going to be acting morally. You may I mean, at some point I would disagree, since you're not doing my ideal comprehensive reform. But for the most part, you're acting ethically, you're acting morally, and you're going to get a lot less opposition. Are you still going to be some people oppose? Yeah, some people are going to oppose. They're going to blow whistles. They're going to exaggerate. But at that point, those people will have a lot less support, because you've gone about it the right way. At that point, the only people who are going to support them are the people who are just extremely biased and just believe whatever propaganda they put out, and people who just agree with them that we've got to do whatever we can to stop all immigration. But of course, we didn't do the right things. Me as an American, I say we, but no, the Trump administration didn't do the right things. They went about it incredibly immorally, and that makes, a lot of people, including me, more sympathetic with people protesting, including in ways that I certainly wouldn't do. Yeah. And so what we have going on now is a lot of people protesting and filming, and that all is legal, and actually filming is good. I think we should film law enforcement. I know I'd be uncomfortable if I was law enforcement, people were filming me, but you got a big job, great responsibility, and some of that requires transparency, and that means people can film. But you also have people who seem to be actively trying to disrupt ICE operations. When they warn people, if you warn a potential criminal that the police are coming, yeah, you're disrupting operations. If they try to slow up traffic because they know ICE is trying to get somewhere, that's disrupting operations. And so that I'm definitely against, even in this scenario. But people like that are going to get more sympathy when, frankly, you're acting unjust with how you're going about this. And this is even before you kill any American civilians. But once you kill American civilians in unjust ways and then lie about it, have leadership lie about it, oh my God, those are acts of tyranny. And if you keep doing that, it's a real tyranny, and that's bad. And I'm someone who doesn't throw around the word tyranny. Actually, I hate when people throw around the word tyranny. Tyranny is a big word. If it's a tyranny, it is an unjust government. If it's a tyranny, violence against the state and those who execute the commands of the state is justified. And so we should not be using tyranny lightly. And that's why I do mitigate it by saying, oh, those are aspects of tyranny. Because if I say, oh, the Trump administration is now tyranny, I mean we're going to fucking war. That's what I mean. I'm probably never going to say that, mainly because I'm a coward, but also because I think that usually ends up being a net bad. So it's clear, I'm not saying that. I'm saying we should obey the law and not kill anyone. But those are aspects of tyranny, and that's dangerous. One, because the tyranny is bad in and of itself, and because at some point, if the tyranny is bad enough, the average person should, if they understand what's going on, actually switch and be against law and order, because law and order is unjust. But these are aspects of tyranny. I'm not saying we're tyrannical yet. I think we should remain protesters and keyboard warriors still, and hopefully never have to go into actual rebellion. Anyways, I don't even remember what I was talking about anymore, so let's just see what people said to this. So, this is not the guy who I was commenting on. That guy didn't respond, but it's someone else responding to me. Green Neck Swamp Yankee. I assume he's a guy who, like, swims in swamps and or walks in swamps, and it goes up to his neck, and then it makes his neck green, because when he gets out of the swamp, he's green up to the neck. Or maybe he has clothes on, so he's actually green underneath too, but you can't see that, so you just see his green neck. I don't actually know. It doesn't matter. Okay, so he said, not in Minneapolis. They've essentially launched an insurgency and turned it into a war zone. They are fighting for zero deportations. So, I think he's responding to my second comment here, where I said the dark communist hellscape you present is a silly exaggeration. So he's saying it is not a silly exaggeration in Minneapolis. Okay, he's going to explain to me how actually how that guy presented it is accurate. And so let's see him develop that argument by calling them an insurgency and saying that what we have there is a war zone, which is an actually more straightforward, silly exaggeration. Insurgency is aspects of truly rebelling against the country. And yeah, if you're trying to slow down ICE, there's elements of that there. But I think when someone uses the word insurgency, we think about, hey, what do we think about that? We think about active long-term plans of violence against the state to try to overthrow the state or have a certain territory rebel against the central government. And that is not what we have, which is why insurgency is a silly exaggeration, because it implies something way above what's actually happening. And then turn it into a war zone. Yeah, man, those streets look chaotic, but this is still an exaggeration. There's not an actual war going on. There'd be a lot more people dead if that was the case. So once again, a dumb exaggeration. If we're trying to seriously talk about the issue, exaggerations aren't helpful. Exaggeration is what you do if you're being dishonest, if you're trying to spread propaganda, or if you yourself don't understand the situation. And I'm not here to do rhetoric. Okay, I'm here to actually discuss the issues. And so these silly exaggerations don't help. And although I might be picking on a couple people here because they're the ones who talk to me, a lot of people do this. So they're more just examples that I ran into and I decided to share with you. So let's see what I said here. Blowing whistles and filming is not an insurgency. If ICE were better trained and led, if the president wasn't so polarizing with his rhetoric and actions, and if ICE followed proper due process, deportations would go much better. Green Neck said, I'm not talking about screaming in signs. Okay, so he's going to explain to me how they're actually an insurgency, trying to overthrow the government, or trying to have a breakaway region. And when you say insurgency, we're thinking organized long-term violence against the state, either trying to overthrow the government or secede in some way. I mean, that's what we're thinking. Which is an exaggerated term when you use it, and that's not happening. So he goes, okay, he's not talking about screaming in signs. I'm talking about the people trained in stopping the enforcement of immigration laws. Okay, warning system, blocking roads, trying to block cars and detention facilities, de-arresting, etc. In Texas, they shot up two facilities. In Texas, they shot up two facilities In LA, they were attacked by rocks and bricks. This isn't people just holding signs and recording. This is an organized system to stop deportations and federal immigration law. So let's see. His first comment, he said, not in Minnesota. So he's making clear Minneapolis, which is in Minnesota. So he's making clear what he's talking about is how in Minneapolis we have an insurgency and a war zone. Okay, why are you talking about LA and Texas? Are we talking Minneapolis or not? I mean, you decide that you're objecting. First of all, this whole thing is about Minnesota, but you've specifically defined what we're talking about as Minneapolis, and I object to that. And you go on talking about other states. It's not a good move there in a conversation. But okay, first of all, in Texas, I thought it was one shooting. I didn't know there was a second, so I don't know if I missed one. But I think it was just one. If there was two, I don't think it changes anything because again, an insurgency is a organized opposition, violent opposition, really to the government. And what we have in Texas was a guy with a screw loose going and shooting up ICE. He may have believed in similar ideology, but a guy who believes in similar ideology and I'm just gonna go shoot things up. That's not a plan. That's not going to go anywhere. That's not trying to achieve a political purpose. That's a crazy guy being turned with some bad ideology, but not someone a part of an insurgency. So that has nothing to do with insurgency. And okay, so he talked about insurgency, a war zone, and so let's see him explain an insurgency and a war zone. Okay, trained in stopping immigration laws. Okay, how do they do that? Warning system. I agree that if you're warning in advance, in my mind, that's interference with law enforcement. I wouldn't have a problem with them being investigated for situations like blocking roads. Again, not cool. I think people should be investigated for that and potentially prosecuted. Trying to block cars and detention facilities. It seems like it's more blocking with cars. I don't really know what de-arresting is, but okay. Again, all of this is bad. I would charge people for these things. Does it turn into an insurgency and a war zone? Is that what we think of when we say insurgency? Is that what we think of when we say war zone? No, that's ridiculous. And so his support that, he's not exaggerating, which is what our discussion is about, that he's not exaggerating when he says it's an insurgency and a war zone, are describing things that don't describe an insurgency or a war zone. And again, some protesters getting too far and throwing stuff is not suddenly insurgency in a war zone. It's protesters who got out of hand. And if the whole protest group just start burning stuff and throwing stuff, you have hundreds or even thousands of people, well, that's called a riot. Even that's not an insurgency or a war zone, which is not even what happened in LA. So, yeah, again, he switched to LA rather than Minneapolis, which he's the one declared what we're talking about, but all right. What you've done is just explained why it's not a war zone, and it's something else that I do agree is not good. Although it's important to remind the context, that's in the context of truly unjust processes by the federal government ordered by Trump. And so, what do you expect when you do that? You're going to expect people to do this, and arguably they have a level of justification. And it's really unfortunate because if they did this anyway, if Trump did everything by the book and they did it anyway, well, I think a lot of people there's some people who are going to support him anyways, but there's people like me who would say, well, actually, this is maybe not my ideal policy, but they look like law enforcement's acting very professionally. The president is acting appropriate and responsible and like a reasonable human. They should not be doing any of this. This is outrageous. And I'm still actually against people doing this, but I get it when you have a government acting unjustly and democratically, ignoring due process, ignoring court orders. Come on. I said they did not shoot anyone in Texas because, of course, he said they shot up 2 facilities. They? Who the fuck is they? I hear they a lot. Not even ironically, just they. Who's they? They did not shoot anyone in Texas. Like one guy did. He wasn't part of an organized insurgency. Most people are just filming and screaming. ICE seems to be operating despite warning systems. Calling this an insurgency is a silly exaggeration. And so, the vast majority of people are more doing the filming and whistling and screaming, which are considered okay, even if especially screaming and stuff is quite obnoxious. ICE seems to be, and ICE is, they're still getting people and stuff. And so it's not like they're unable to operate. So it's not even really working that well. It might be slowing it down some, but either way, that doesn't add up to insurgency. Some protests have some people who throw shit. Also isn't an insurgency. It's some people getting too amped up. And none of this is the previously described hellscape and could have been mostly avoided if we had better leadership, due process, and training. Exaggerating is ignoring the real problem. I'm open to unpolarizing rhetoric, due process, and professional deportations combined with arresting and prosecuting those who are intentionally interfering with law enforcement operations. And here she says, this is not an exaggeration. If you think it is, I don't think you understand the full scope of the resistance. It's organized and funded. The goal simply isn't to fill them, it's to stop them. Again, some interference doesn't add up to an insurgency or a war zone. And so she basically said, well, it's not an exaggeration, so let me describe things that are clearly describing something less than the words I did. And the words I said were stronger, much more stronger, make you think of much greater, more dangerous and daunting things, which means he was grossly exaggerating. It's organized and funded. Okay, that alone doesn't make an insurgency, and the goal is simply to fill them. It's to stop them. I mean, a lot of things are organized and funded, including regular protests that are 100% legal. But also, we're not like disagreeing here. I agree that there's some level of people who are interfering, and that's bad. I'm just saying it didn't suddenly create a war zone, nor did it create insurgency. That's just exaggerating, which is weird because the whole conversation originally was me complaining about someone else exaggerating, and then he follows up by exaggerating. Trying to warn people about ICE and slowing traffic to slow down ICE sounds like interfering with law enforcement to me. And if done intentionally, I wouldn't have a problem with prosecuting if this breaks specific laws. Calling that an insurgency is a ridiculous exaggeration. And so now another guy came in, agreeing with this guy. Tier of the prophets. Or is it tear? Are tear and tier spelled the same way? If so, confusing word, English. Anyways, tier of the prophets. The governor actively called for a rebellion. Again, I think this is another exaggeration or a falsehood. From what I've seen, the governor of Minnesota's walls, I've seen him complain about Trump, talk about things in fairly harsh language, which, considering how unprofessionally they're acting, he's somewhat justified for doing that. But he definitely didn't call for a rebellion. He didn't call for people to go out there and violently resist the federal government. So this is just not true. So again, we're in a conversation about whether words are exaggerating. A third guy comes in and just does another exaggeration. And frankly, I think this is more an exaggeration. I would say this is false. They are painting kill ICE and death to America on walls. That's bad. I don't think people should do that. Again, that doesn't add up to an insurgency. People say violent and stupid things all the time. That doesn't mean there's an insurgency, doesn't mean there's a war zone. They believe they are an insurgency. Just because you don't doesn't mean they aren't. I don't know if they believe that or not, but either way, people believe all sorts of stupid things about others and themselves. It doesn't change the truth. Exactly. This is him agreeing with Tier. I just listen to them, see what they're doing, and read their materials and training manuals. This is the first time he brought up training manuals. So I had, before this conversation, I watch and listen to a lot of things. I saw an interview with a guy with manuals, actual training manuals for people protesting ICE in Minnesota. And now maybe there's different manuals out there. I don't know. But the manuals I know about are about protesting. They're about blowing whistles. They're about staying within the law. And actually part of the manuals is how to do all this while being within the law. And so we're talking about an insurgency causing a war zone, and then you bring up manuals, but the manuals are about how to do all this while staying within the law. That's not an insurgency or a war zone. Now, maybe there's different manuals I'm not aware of. Maybe he'll link them towards me to further show his argument. That would be nice, because at this point I just have to take his word for it. But again, I'm aware of manuals, and I feel like there's a very good chance we're aware of the same manuals, and I just actually did a better dive in what they actually say, and he just assumed a bunch of things and just basically believes false things about these manuals. That would be my guess. So I said walls do not call for rebellion. There's always going to be someone saying or writing something stupid that doesn't make a war zone or an insurrection. So here's my bad. I accidentally changed insurgency to insurrection. I don't think that's a big deal. All my points are the same, but that was just an accident. I forgot which INS word we were using. So that's my bad. It doesn't change anything I'm saying, but my bad. I did not mean to switch the word there. That was just an accident. I believe based on evidence, a little thing we call evidence. People believing something doesn't mean much. A lot of people protesting and filming, and some people interfering with ICE operations by warning people or in other mild ways, does not make a war zone or an insurrection or an insurgency. What training materials? Link them. Here's a direct request. You got them. Show them to me. I will, if it's not paid wall, I will look at them. He didn't link them, by the way, which, maybe he didn't even read this. Maybe he was ready to move on. Maybe he saw that somewhere. It doesn't automatically mean it's false, but, I'm giving you an opportunity to prove it to me, especially because I'm aware of the training materials and the manuals, and they don't say what he thinks he says, unless they're different ones, or maybe the interview I watched tricked me. Maybe that guy was full of crap. But, if we're referring to the same manuals, they certainly weren't leading to an insurgency. That's a ridiculous exaggeration if we're referring to the same ones. So maybe he'll link them for me. He didn't. So there's no maybe. He didn't. He didn't even tell me how to get to him. I saw an interview with a guy who was handing out manuals, and the manuals were about filming and blowing whistles. Again, that's not a war zone or an insurrection. Insurgency. That's what I meant. Forgot. I actually changed the word. If ICE keeps unjustly killing civilians, they will have proven themselves agents of a tyrannical government. If a real war zone results from that, it will have been caused by ICE and Trump. Again, like I said at the top, the way Trump and ICE is going about this is irresponsibly, undemocratically, not keeping themselves within the law. And because of that, this is not just people protesting law enforcement. They're protesting unjust actions and a lack of professionalism. And then when you get ICE, and one of them was actually Border Patrol, killing U.S. civilians in ways that I think are pretty clearly unjust, followed up by the leaders lying about that rather than saying, yeah, we're going to make sure we investigate this and, have a calm, rational decision of what needs to be done. Those are acts of tyranny. And like I said, if it keeps happening, if you keep unjustly killing civilians, I don't think I'm saying anything really very controversial here. Yeah, if the government keeps unjustly killing civilians, we have a tyrannical government. And that's an important if. And in which case, if the government's doing that, I don't care if some of these protesters were out of hand or some of them were interfering where they shouldn't have. If the government's doing that, it's on them if something worse results. You're so caught up in the rhetoric, you don't even realize you're feeding the problem. This is really weird. So I complained that I thought a guy exaggerated. A second guy came in to defend him with stupidly exaggerating. A third guy comes in stupidly exaggerating. And my whole point here is, hey, let's actually be real and talk about what's happening and not use exaggerative, which is, by the way, false language. It's describing things inaccurately. It's not helping us understand things. It's just amping things up. It's BS rhetoric. And so, ironically and frankly, hypocritically, he then accuses me of caught up in the rhetoric, okay, when to say I'm caught up in the rhetoric, he uses false statements and is saying it's an insurgency. He didn't explicitly defend war zone, but an insurgency when that is an exaggerated term. That is actually the rhetoric he's caught up in. Anyways. And of course, I say, ironically, the person feeding the rhetoric is you. We've got to be able to somewhat accurately describe and understand and not exaggerate. We can't understand the real problem if we exaggerate. And exaggerations justify unjustified escalations. You're a statist. So exaggeration. One thing, we're not understanding the situation. because we're either lying or unintentionally saying something false about what's happening. Exaggeration is falsely describing something with words that do not really describe the situation by making it sound worse or bigger than it is in some way. And that means we're not, just as far as truth, we're not meeting truth because we're exaggerating. We're saying false things. But also, to the extent that you're not the only one doing that, a lot of people are doing that, then you're part of the problem. You're part of the problem of making things sound more dangerous than they are. And the thing is, if things are dangerous, it justifies stronger escalation, stronger fighting back, stronger defense, or a forward defense to stop those dangers. But of course, if those dangers were exaggerated, then you just caused us to spend resources and do escalations that are going to get people hurt by you exaggerating. And so it's bad, and they're completely unaware. They seem to be completely unaware that they're stupidly exaggerating. Now, you're a statist. This is sort of a dick thing on my part to say, although there's a point to it, but it's not exactly good taste. So, Twitter, or X as it's called now, on the side, if you're talking to someone, it will show you, hey, do you know this guy? And it'll show a little piece of their profile. X doesn't give a lot of room for a profile, and I don't see the whole profile, but still, because there's not a room, what you put in your profile is kind of key. Like, it's like a key part of what you stand for. And what he had written, tier here, what he had written is, look, so it pulls it up right here, not a statist. So, yeah, his whole profile, as far as I could tell. So this is really like a key part of at least his political ideology, is he's not a statist. Because, that's like all he wrote to describe himself. And unless he means something else by statist, statist people are pro-government intervention, pro the bureaucracy, pro-government power. And he says, and he describes himself as not a statist. Yet, my only interaction with him is essentially him defending really aggressive and illegal operations of the state by lying about the state. And so he's defending the state with exaggerations and misleading statements, and apparently not understanding what's actually happening, to defend aggressive state action where civilians are being killed by those agents of the state. And you say you're not a statist? That's like your main thing you're going to say? So someone is not realizing what's happening in his thinking there. And so that's ironic, and I wanted to point that out. But then again, that's really now talking about him personally, his ideology, so it's kind of in poor taste, but whatever. But there at least was a point to it relevant to our conversation. It's not the most poor taste, but nevertheless, it's not necessarily ideal. And he said, I'm not, but I know what the state will do under these circumstances, and I know the rhetoric being thrown around in Minnesota. Okay, well, that's not really defense. Essentially what you're doing is exaggerating and saying false things about what's happening to justify the state intervening. That's kind of a statist thing to do. It's a real statist thing to do. But okay. And that was that. So, what did we talk about here? I think I've already repeated about what I talked about over and over again, and I had a nice summary at the beginning, so I don't think I'm going to re-sum that up. I'll check for comments from my millions and millions of viewers, and seeing that there are none, I will sign off. I'm Lone Candle. Like me, comment me, love me. End stream.